Welcome to the Endo Belly Girl podcast. I'm your host, Alyssa Chavez. I'm a nutritional therapy practitioner and restorative wellness practitioner on a mission to change the way that we support women with endometriosis. Endo is a full-body disease that impacts your mind, body, and spirit in countless ways that aren't often addressed the way that women truly deserve. We are here to talk about all of it. Please keep in mind that the content of this show has been created for educational purposes only and should never be used as a replacement for medical diagnosis or treatment. Hello, and welcome back to the Endo Belly Girl podcast. I'm Alyssa Chavez, your host. I'm a functional nutritionist specializing in endometriosis, here to share with you all of the things to help you on your endo journey. So, this episode here is kind of a continuation of the conversation that we've been having lately all about hormones. So if you haven't yet, I would take a moment to go back and listen to the last couple of episodes. Episode 55 and 56 were all about, episode 55 was about tuning into your menstrual cycle and really fully understanding the phases of your cycle. And then episode 56 was all about estrogen and the ups and downs and ins and outs and myths and all the things that we need to know about estrogen. So if you haven't listened to those yet, I would hit pause on this, go back, listen to those two episodes first, because this one will make a bit more sense if you have had that part of the conversation already. So today we are going to take a deep dive into the partner hormone to estrogen, progesterone. Now remember, this is something that we talked about in the last episode. If you are someone who struggles with estrogen dominance, it may not actually be a too much estrogen issue like we're so often taught. It might actually be a low progesterone issue, because at the end of the day, what really matters is that those two hormones are in a good ratio with each other. So it is actually possible to have a normal amount of estrogen but have low progesterone and still have estrogen dominance symptoms. You can even have low estrogen but even lower progesterone and still struggle with estrogen dominance symptoms. So it's not as simple as just having too much estrogen. We really unpacked that in the last episode, but I just wanted to tie that in here because it's going to matter with today's conversation too. And I also wanted to remind you all that endometriosis is a condition that is affected by hormones, but not caused by hormones. I think so many of us are kind of taught that along the way, that it's all about the estrogen. We want to shut down the estrogen and block the hormones, and then we'll be good to go. But hormones at the end of the day are a piece of the puzzle. And actually, one thing that I talk about a lot in my practice, especially when I'm working with one-on-one clients, is that hormone imbalance of any kind is a symptom, but not the root cause in and of itself. If there's any sort of hormone imbalance, that's just a sign telling us that there's more stuff going on underneath the surface that we need to take a look at. So keep that in mind as you listen to today's episode. It's a piece of the puzzle, but not the whole story. So today, we're going to take a look at what progesterone does in your body, why it matters for endometriosis, how to test progesterone levels, and how to support progesterone if it is, in fact, low. Okay, so for starters, what is progesterone? Let's start with the basics here. So progesterone is one of our main sex hormones for cycling females, and really, its main purpose in our jobs is that it's progesterone. It is a progestation hormone. It's essential for pregnancy. And one of the things I find really cool about progesterone is the production of it in our bodies is one of those absolutely amazing, miraculous things that our bodies do. And it does it each and every month. So every single month when you ovulate, the follicle, which is the thing inside of your ovary that releases the egg, that follicle ends up turning into what's called the corpus luteum. And the corpus luteum then turns into a temporary endocrine gland. And an endocrine gland is a gland that releases hormones. And this is where progesterone is produced and released. So the short story is that progesterone is produced in the ovaries. That's, I know, what I was taught initially and understood for most of my life. But the full picture is that actually a brand new gland is created within your ovary each and every month. Amazing. Let's just take a step back for a moment and honor how absolutely amazing that really is. You actually create a brand new gland in your body every month. Crazy. Okay. I think that's really cool. So now if you do, during that cycle, if you do end up getting pregnant, during pregnancy, once you get into pregnancy, I believe it's about somewhere between 10 to 12 weeks, your placenta begins to take over progesterone production. But otherwise, during a regular menstrual cycle, it is produced by that corpus luteum. After menopause, your adrenals take over progesterone production. So the ovaries begin to shut down during menopause. The adrenals then take over that sex hormone production because we don't need nearly as much post-menopause, but you still need some. So the adrenals take over. They produce less hormone than you had during your cycling years, logically so. And that's kind of a whole story for another day because that can cause a whole host of other issues. Or I shouldn't say it causes a whole host of other issues, but oftentimes our adrenals tend to be a little overworked and struggle a little bit with the correct function that they should be having. And so when they try to take over hormone production, it can lead to some issues. But that's really a story for another day. We're going to focus today on progesterone, primarily for cycling females, because I know that's most of my audience who listens to this podcast. So the main job of progesterone is to support a healthy pregnancy, but that's not its only job. Progesterone also is very calming on your nervous system. So progesterone actually converts to allopregnanolone, which is a neurosteroid, and that neurosteroid binds to GABA receptors in the brain, which produces a calming effect. Also helps to support sleep and mood and reduces PMS symptoms. So we definitely want to have progesterone in your body, even if you're not necessarily trying to get pregnant at this point in time. And that progesterone, kind of like we talked about earlier, it also counterbalances estrogen. So, for example, progesterone thins the uterine lining where estrogen thickens it. So that's where one of the main symptoms of estrogen dominance is heavy periods. And progesterone can be really supportive in thinning that uterine lining so that the periods are not that heavy. Also, progesterone boosts your thyroid function where estrogen suppresses it. So they have a lot of kind of opposite effects in their body. And that's where sometimes when we're looking at the big picture, we're kind of zoom out and look at all the things going on in your body. We can start to see a lot of evidence of what your hormones are doing before you've even tested them, which is pretty cool. So basically, when progesterone is low, estrogen has excessive effects. It's when it's higher in ratio to the progesterone. So symptoms of low progesterone, therefore, tend to be very similar to estrogen dominance symptoms like we talked about in last week's episode. So that can include symptoms like anxiety, irregular periods, hair loss, cramps, acne, low sex drive, mood swings, depression, chronic pain, brain fog, water and fluid retention, bloating during PMS, miscarriage, nausea, and migraines. So a lot of things that can come up with that low progesterone. Spotting between periods, I would say, is one of the big symptoms that I see of low progesterone. So especially if you're spotting for days and days and days before your period starts, or maybe you're spotting for days and days and days after your period ends. I know this used to be my story. Once upon a time, I used to spot for like 7 days before my period started. It was a lot. And then I would continue spotting for several days after my period finished. So I ended up spotting for like half of my cycle. That's no longer the case for me. I'm at a place now where my hormones are much more in balance. So it's not so much of a concern now, but it's something that I see sometimes in my practice. So something to keep an eye on there. Now, those estrogen dominance symptoms like heavy cycles, PMS, cramps, breast tenderness, that can, again, present with normal or even low estrogen, but low progesterone. It's relative. Okay, so that's typically what low progesterone might look like, but what we really want to investigate here, this is always my question as a functional practitioner. I'm always asking why. Okay, so let's say we know that progesterone is low, and we'll circle back to testing for progesterone levels in a bit and kind of the options for that. But let's say you have tested progesterone, you know it's low, and or maybe you're just seeing some of those low progesterone type symptoms. Then we want to investigate why that's happening in the first place, right? Because I mentioned that hormone imbalance is not a root cause. Hormone imbalance is a symptom of what's going on deeper in your body. Now, when it comes to low progesterone, the number one reason that I see for that in my practice, not just in my practice, just in general, because I do a lot of reading research papers and fun stuff like that. Number one is that your body doesn't feel safe. Because if we go back to the earlier days of humanity where things like famine were much more common, for example, or just times of very high stress, reproduction isn't going to be a priority in your body at that point in time. It's just not. We're going to prioritize, nourishment and staying alive. That's what your body's going to be prioritizing. Now, you may not be in a state of famine in your life. If you are, I hope that you're able to get some support for that. But maybe you are just under a lot of stress, right? And stress can come from kind of that psychological stress, outside influences happening. But stress can also come from inside of your body. There's a lot of internal forms of stress that really can impact your body in the way that it feels. And definitely one of the big ones that I see absolutely is a pattern of, under-eating, possibly combined with over-exercising. So definitely just making sure that you're getting enough calories on a regular basis. You're not overdoing it with exercise so that your body knows that it has enough nutrients and nourishment to be able to produce energy and do all the things that it needs to do. And that stress inside of your body can also come from blood sugar dysregulation. It can come from gut infections. It can come from food sensitivities. There's other things that can impact that level of stress inside of your body as well. So working on addressing all of that definitely should be a priority if you have low progesterone. One example, just when it comes to the nourishment piece of it, your body actually needs cholesterol in order to produce sex hormones. And I know cholesterol is one of those things that's been kind of demonized. I think less so now, but it's definitely something that had been very demonized. Like, we want to avoid eggs. We don't want to eat any foods that have cholesterol. And some people just really jumped hardcore on that bandwagon. And what happens when you're just really actively avoiding dietary cholesterol is that you can end up having too low of cholesterol in your body. And if you don't have enough of those resources, your body can't produce hormones. Cholesterol is one of the ingredients, so to speak, that your body uses to produce hormones. So what I see clinically is that if your cholesterol is below 150, this is not just what I see clinically. Again, this is coming from many scientists and people out there who are doing, boots on the ground work, trying to figure out how different things impact our bodies. And that's what's been shown, is that cholesterol under 150 is not enough to produce sex hormones. So oftentimes what I'll see there with testing is just flatlined. There's just nothing going on in the world of your hormones. So something to be aware of with that. All right. Also, there can be a bit of a domino effect going on because we talked about how progesterone is produced, that it's produced by that corpus luteum. Well, that is dependent on a lot of other moving parts and pieces. So that corpus luteum, or that follicle that develops, has actually been developing for about 100 days before ovulation. It's not something that just happens for the couple of weeks in that cycle. Those follicles start developing months in advance, and then it's only during that cycle that your body basically chooses a dominant follicle that ends up being the lucky winner for ovulation, right? So there's many things then during that 100 days that can impact, right? If you have healthy follicles, you'll end up having a healthy ovulation, which means a healthy corpus luteum, which means more progesterone. Or if all that's not happening, then you might not see the progesterone levels. And this is also why it can take some time to see shifts in your hormones. It's not an overnight change. And also, there can be a bit of a domino effect with LH and FSH signaling. So LH and FSH are hormones that are sent out by the pituitary gland in your brain. And if there's issues with signaling there will end up being issues with ovulation. And if, since progesterone is produced basically as a product of ovulation, that can also lead to low progesterone. So you have to have a healthy, robust ovulation in order to produce progesterone, which is why also if you have an anovulatory cycle, meaning you did not ovulate at all, you're probably not going to have super high progesterone. And also just if you have a short luteal phase. So remember, the luteal phase is that period of time between ovulation and your next period. If that time is too short, that can impact progesterone levels as well. And kind of vice versa too, right? If there's not enough progesterone to support that full luteal phase, it's kind of a two-way street. All right. I did want to touch base on this really quickly. Typically, what I see in my practice is much more often the low progesterone picture if there is an imbalance there. I did want to touch base just for a moment on progesterone excess, high progesterone. Now, this doesn't typically happen just on its own. It's very, very rare, if ever, that somebody comes to me and just has high progesterone based on their own natural rhythms. Typically, when we see progesterone excess, it's coming from exogenous progesterone, which means it's not the hormones that your body's producing, it's coming from outside of your body, which can be, hormone replacement, birth control, which is actually a synthetic progesterone, but still has similar impacts in your body, or can even be those topical progesterone creams. And the challenge with those creams, this is why I don't really recommend that, especially without practitioner supervision. Creams can be difficult to dose. They can build up in your body. They can be a risk to others around you because they can easily be transferred. And they can end up leading to these progesterone excess symptoms, which can look like sleep disorders, weight gain, depression, emotional ups and downs, exacerbated estrogen excess symptoms. So it's one of those things. You don't want too much of a good thing. That's why my recommendation is to work more from that root cause approach and figure out why progesterone is low in the first place. Okay, let's talk testing progesterone. There's more than one way to test progesterone, like many things in life. The kind of go-to for most people is serum testing, so a blood test. And what I really want to say I have a couple things I really want to say about this. Number one is that the timing really matters. We've talked about how the hormones fluctuate throughout your cycle. Progesterone is going to really increase and peak post-ovulation. So if you're doing the testing too early or too late, that can very much impact the results. The typical recommendation is day 21 of your cycle to test progesterone. However, that is based on your typical 14-day, your typical 28-day cycle with ovulation happening on day 14. Because if that happens, if you ovulate on day 14, that means 7 days later would be day 21, and that would be about halfway through the luteal phase, which should be about the peak of the bell curve of progesterone, right? Because progesterone starts to increase after ovulation. It peaks about a week after ovulation and then slowly starts to drop off from there. Now, consider, do you actually ovulate on day 14? Because if you don't, let's say you didn't ovulate until day 19, for example, a progesterone test on day 21 can be wildly inaccurate in the grand scheme of things. So my general recommendation is to just test progesterone about 7 days after ovulation, which does mean you have to track your ovulation. You can use like a fertility awareness-based method or LH test strips. I mean, there's different ways to track ovulation, but you do have to know what's going on with that. My other note with progesterone serum testing is that it is a snapshot, and this is true of any sort of blood test, right? It's just a single moment in time of what is going on in your blood, and progesterone levels can fluctuate quite a bit even throughout the course of a single day. So it could end up being lower or higher just based on what time of day you did the test also. So just things to note, it's not necessarily a perfect solution. Now, I don't have a perfect solution, of course, to testing. There's pros and cons to each. I'm more just here to give you the information so that, again, you're making the most informed decisions for your own body. The other option, urine testing. Dutch test is the test that my go-to for dried urine testing. Now, it's important to know with the Dutch test, you're not directly measuring progesterone because there isn't progesterone to measure in your urine. What you're actually measuring on a Dutch test is the metabolites of progesterone. And so basically, what they do in that test is there's two major metabolites of progesterone, so they take the average of those to give you a reading on progesterone levels. The benefit of the dried urine testing is that it gives you an average over 4 collections throughout the day. So given that we know that progesterone levels can fluctuate, it can give you maybe a more accurate reading on those metabolites, but then it is important to know that it's an indirect measurement of progesterone. So just things to consider, things to think about. A combination of the two can be really powerful also because there's just different things that you can learn from serum testing as opposed to a Dutch test. So I will sometimes use those in combination in my practice. All right, let's talk supporting progesterone if it is in fact low. Number 1, stress management. We already talked about the impacts of stress on your progesterone levels, so definitely that has to be a priority in your life. Stress directly affects your hypothalamus, which is in your brain, and the hypothalamus signals the pituitary to release FSH and LH, which affects ovulation, which in turn affects progesterone. So it becomes a big domino effect. Plus, again, your body needs to feel safe in order to reproduce. Reproduction is never going to be prioritized in times of great stress or famine. So I talk a lot, when we're talking gut health, I talk a lot about rest to digest. I will add to that today and say rest to reproduce as well. So prioritize rest. And rest is not the same as just going to sleep at night. I'm talking taking time to actually fully rest. Meditation, movement, maybe looking into therapy can even be an option if that's something that you need in your life. Journaling, the things that fill up your cup. Prioritize those. I know it sounds maybe too simple, and how much can this really impact my health? The answer is a lot. It can very much impact your health in so many ways beyond just your hormones. So Stress is number one. And even is there anything that you can just take off your plate? I know I'm guilty of this and have been at times that sometimes as women, we just carry the weight of the world and there are things that we can actually take off. So things to consider. All right, additional modalities that can be supportive of your nervous system can include things like acupuncture, vagus nerve support, somatics. There's some wonderful modalities out there too that can be a great nervous system support. There are some supplements / nutrients also that can be really helpful. I'm a big fan of adaptogens like ashwagandha. It's kind of a easy one to find and generally pretty safe for people. But there's tons of different adaptogens out there that can be really powerful tools to assist with that stress management and just supporting the brain and the whole axis in your body that allows these hormones to be produced in the first place. But then there's also certain nutrients that our body both needs for a stress response and also are depleted during a stress response. So those include nutrients like magnesium, vitamin C, B vitamins, zinc. And so helping to replete those minerals in your body can actually be really supportive so that your body's better able to adapt to stress when it does come up. And then the simple stuff, make sure that you're eating enough. You need protein and fat to produce hormones. You need cholesterol, like we talked about before. You need your body to help to feel safe and nourished. You need to be eating enough for your body and getting a wide variety of nutrients for those minerals and vitamins. You need to keep your blood sugar balanced and stable based on what and how you're eating. I recorded a whole episode about how blood sugar connects with hormone balance. Spoiler alert, a lot. Episode 21, I'll link to that in the show notes if you want to go back and check out that episode as well. And then there's also, I debated whether to mention this on the podcast because, again, this is something that I typically would recommend working with a practitioner on this stuff, but I'm here really to educate you and help you to understand what your options are. So if you're working with somebody and want to kind of bring this into your field of awareness, there's an herb called Vitex or chaste tree berry is another name of it. And it's believed to help to shift the estrogen and progesterone balance in your body. It's a pretty powerful supplement, but usually you buy it like in a tincture form or sometimes in a capsule form. So something to kind of look into and think about. I do just generally recommend with supplements, it's always best to be just working alongside a practitioner to help to determine what's best for you and your unique body whenever that is possible, because there's a lot of things that can have an influence and an impact on your body. So the better we can understand that, the better we can support ourselves, our own bodies. So I hope that this helped you to understand progesterone better and how to support overall hormone health. If you enjoyed today's episode, please leave a review. Head over to Instagram, find me at EndoBellyGirl and shoot me a little message. Let me know your thoughts. I mentioned this, I think, in last week's episode. There's also a new feature at the top of your show notes. You see a little link that says send a text. You can send me a message that way. As a reminder, those messages are a one-way street. I can't reply to those other than just replying in the form of the podcast here, but they're super fun for me to read. I love hearing your responses, letting me know if you're enjoying the episodes. So please feel free to send messages in some way, shape, or form. I love to hear your feedback and just even to hear your own stories and connect with you. You know, I really got into this not just to talk to a computer, but to really connect with other human beings. So I'm genuinely happy to have conversations with you and support you in any way that I can. All right, my friend, much love. Have a great day. We'll talk soon. Thank you so much for joining me today, my friend. If you loved what you heard, be sure to share with a friend and subscribe so that you can keep coming back for more. If you are ready to take the next step towards getting to the root cause of your endo symptoms like endobelly, pain, fatigue, and so much more, you need to download my free ultimate guide to building your own endometriosis diet. You can find the link in the show notes or at www.endobellygirl.com. Until next time, my friend.